Hello and welcome everyone on my channel, the Garden City Project. My name is Greg Holenstein and I'm a landscape architect. In this episode, I'm going to talk about mobility and its influence on the development of cities. The reason why I make this long episode about mobility is because I think it's a very important issue. And it's very important to know how mobility is connected to living, to our housing situation. And so I want to talk deeply about this topic. I want to have first a look at the past. How did it evolve? How did mobility evolve over the centuries? And how it's going to be in the future? I will take a look at the future in the end of this episode. Over the last few centuries, there have been immense changes in mobilities, starting with the invention of the steam-powered engine and the railway system in the beginning of the 18th century. Continuing with the invention of the automobile at the end of the 19th century. And the latest major invention in mobility is probably the commercial aviation, so the flying industry, so to say. So we are able to move from one continent to another within less than one day. Nowadays, we are used to all of those inventions. We can go anywhere with our car, we can go to holiday with airplanes, and all our goods we need are shipped around the world. So we are completely used to all of these inventions. But only 3 centuries ago, all those inventions were not existing. At those times, people had to move around by feet, or they had to take a horse or a horse carriage. That was the maximum they had at those times. And of course, they had sailing ships. But this is only available on the sea. Now I want to give you an overview of all the changes in mobility over the last few centuries. First, we are going to have a look about the mobility and transportation systems they had until the 18th century. And as I told you before, in those times, they only had the best transportation system on land was the horse and the horse-drawn carriage. And so it was quite possible to transport some goods and also to transport people on horse carriage and on the horse itself. On the sea, they had ships, they had sailing ships at this time. And they were actually quite good. The best way to transport goods, even nowadays, is with ships. Because on the water you can transport goods much cheaper than on land, and it's much easier, even nowadays. And so at this time they were already able to transport goods all around the globe. With the sailing ships they had at those times. Of course, they were much slower than our ships today. So that was one of the major reasons why they were building so many cities close to the sea or close to rivers that were connected to the sea, because trading was always a big driver of prosperity. It was a big advantage for cities when they were built close to the sea, so it was much easier to trade with other cities and other nations. That's a major reason why so many old historical cities in Europe were built at the sea, like Venice, Stockholm, Amsterdam, and so on. And many other big cities were built close to rivers, or were built on rivers that were close to the sea, like London, Hamburg, and Antwerp. Now we are coming to the chapter upcoming of the railway. The railway could only be invented thanks to the steam-powered engine. And the steam-powered engine was invented at the beginning of the 18th century in England. Exactly, it's 1712. The first locomotive with a steam-powered engine was only invented in 1804. So it's nearly 100 years later when the first steam engine was built. So it needed a lot of time to make the steam engine better, to make it usable for locomotives. But from then on, like, the locomotive and the railway could spread all around the world. Like, it first started in England and it first spread in continental Europe and later on also in Northern America. Especially the USA was very quickly in implementing the railway. Like, they were building the first transcontinental railroad from New York to San Francisco, and this is amazingly 5,300 kilometers long. And for this time, this was a really big achievement. By building the railroad from the East Coast to the West Coast, the USA was able to colonize the west of the country much quicker, and they were able to build many new cities in the West. So now we come to have a look at what was the influence on city development. What did the railway system has an influence on the city development? And so we have to look that the railway system made it possible to connect cities that were far away from each other. And at this time you could travel much quicker from one city to another than with a horse. And it made it even possible to build up new cities in remote areas. For example, in the USA, in the Great Plains, very difficult to access. But with the railway system, it was possible to access all these remote cities. Upcoming of the automobile. Like, the first automobile was invented in Germany in 1881. After the invention of the automobile, it was spreading all around the industrialized countries. First, it was only available for richer citizens because the car was very expensive to build first. But when they implemented mass production, especially in the USA, they made it possible that everyone could afford a car, or nearly everyone. After the Second World War, the car had its boom in the Western world, in the industrialized countries. Like, every household could afford a car from then on. And so this had a major impact on city development. Now we look closer. What were the consequences of the implementation of the car? What were the consequences on city development? The greatest advantages of the automobile was the people were very mobile. They could work in one place and live in another place. They could live in the suburb and work in the city centers. They were no longer forced to live at their workplace, and so this gave a lot of opportunities for people. So from now on we could design new areas that were only for living, and we could create areas for industries. So we could separate those areas, which had a lot of advantages and also some disadvantages. So the automobile made it possible for people to live in houses, in suburbs, and work in the city center or work anywhere, because before that people were forced to live closer to each other because they need to have everything in foot distances, because they didn't have the possibility to make big distances, and so they had to live much closer to each other. And the invention of the car made it possible that suburbs emerged. And through this new invention, the automobile, people could also have houses on the countryside, and this made it possible that there was an escape of the cities. Like we saw that in Europe after the Second World War, when people could afford a car, like every household could afford a car, people could build their houses on the countryside. In conclusion, we can say definitely that the invention and the implementation of the automobile had a massive impact of development of cities. It made it possible that the suburbs were growing bigger and bigger, that the many villages were growing bigger and bigger, and that people could spread more throughout the country and were not forced to live in a smaller space where they had everything in walking distance. The upcoming of commercial aviation, more or less at the same time after the Second World War, it was going to be possible for the most of the people in Western society that they could afford to fly to different destinations with an airplane. Because before that, it was not affordable for the most people. It was only affordable for very rich people to fly. It was a luxury good. The commercial aviation didn't have such a great impact on city development as the automobile had, but it still had quite a big impact, especially on our modern society, because through the aviation it was possible that cities were even more connected to each other, especially in countries like the USA and Canada, in which cities are very far from each other, and for people it's mostly the quickest way to go to another city by airplane. And so this made it possible that cities and different countries were connected even better through the aviation industry. Future development. Now we are going to have a look at future development, at mobility in the future, and what is the impact of mobility in the future on the city development. How can we adapt those things and how can we bring those two pieces together? Nowadays, many people want to live in the city or even in the city center, in the very center of some cities. And yeah, I understand that because there are a lot of attractive things to live there. You are connected to a lot of different people. It's probably very exciting to live there. And so a lot of cities all around the world are growing very quick. And yeah, of course, it's also because in cities, if you live in the city center, you have access to much better jobs than on the countryside or even than in the suburbs. But with the growing of the cities, there are also coming a lot of problems, like a lot of cities are going to be overloaded, and especially the traffic is overloaded in many cities around the world. Like they have too much car traffic all around the world in the bigger cities. Nowadays, many cities are planning to expand public transport and to expand bicycle paths. And yes, this makes also sense for cities, because in cities space is rare and cars need a lot of space. That's a fact, that's just a fact, because we need parking spaces for car, and even on the road they need a lot of space. And so it makes sense that a lot of cities want to have as less car as possible in their city centers. But on the other hand, if you live on the countryside or if you live in smaller town, it's just a big advantage if you have a car, because with that you have a maximum amount of mobility. If we want to find solutions for the future city, for the mobility of the future cities, we also need to think about the cars. We can, of course, it's a possibility to ban cars from the inner city and to make big parking spaces in the outskirts of the cities, but it's not a solution to totally ban cars, because there are still many people living in the countryside, there are still people living in villages and smaller towns, and they also need to be able to go to the cities, they also need their mobility. And so for the future, we need to be able to solve the problem of mass traffic without taking the mobility of the people. One part of the solution, considering the car traffic, is to make the inner cities, the center of the cities, completely car-free, but we build like big parking garage buildings outside of the city centers where people can park their car. And with today's technologies, it's even possible to make this automatically, that you can drive there and there's a robot that parks automatically the car, which goes much quicker if you have to drive yourself into the parking garage. And so from there you can go to the city center with public transport. And that makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, because then we have the cars outside of the city center, people have more space there, and still, if you have a car, if you live on the countryside, you are still able to go to the city center with your car, but through a big parking garage. And there are even more possibilities to solve these problems, like there are in the future we probably have self-driving cars, and we have drones and everything, and a lot of high-speed trains. And yeah, if we want to solve these problems, we have to think about all these different aspects, and we don't have to focus just on one thing. We can't just say everyone has to go buy food and everyone has to take public transport or a bicycle and nobody's allowed to drive a car. That's not possible. This will not happen, because we always need to find a good solution. A good solution means that we have to think about everyone, about different aspects, not about only the city, but also about the countryside, about small villages. We have to make a whole concept that fits together. And yeah, in my opinion, it's the best thing if we connect all these things together and to find a connected solution. So this is the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you could learn something. If you liked it, just press the like button, leave me a comment here, and see you next time. Bye.